Welcome to Biblicultus, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, literature, and history. In this episode, I will go over the replica, the 1830 replica of the Book of Mormon. But before I start, remember to subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, click the bell for notifications, share the video, comment on the video, and like the video. It really helps the channel out. So, the Book of Mormon, obviously a very famous book in the New World because I would say it's the first American Bible. Now, of course, we do have ancient scriptures in the Americas before the Europeans arrived, in the sense of the Popol Vuh of the Incas and many other texts that unfortunately were destroyed by the Spanish when they conquered Central America. Nonetheless, we do have some remnants of these books, although the books that we have are primarily calendar books or books on administrative concerns. So we don't really have, to this point in history, any theological or historical book per se. I mean, you do have list of kings and things like this, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot. And actually, I love books on the Maya and on the Aztecs and on the Inca. It's one of my favorite topics, actually. But unfortunately, we don't have what you would call a proper Bible. So the Book of Mormon is the first American Bible. So just on a historical perspective, it is a very important book, and it should be read by most people just because of this factor. Now, the edition that I'm reading here is a replica of the 1830 edition by Grandin Artisans, and it's a very cool edition because the only thing that identifies it as a modern rendition is a dust jacket that basically informs you about the intent by Grandin Artisans to make it as close to the original as possible in the type, in the size, in the materials, etc. So as a replica, it's a very good quality replica of the book, and I've seen original ones out there. They're very expensive, and this is pretty close. It even contains some of the type errors and things like that. They wanted to preserve that as well. And it sustains the original structure of the book. Now, the other reason I wanted to read is I've read, the Book of Mormon as the LDS today sells it. I also have a North American model or North American geographic model version of the Book of Mormon. It's actually one of my favorite books because it's really cool. It has pictures, and I'll do a review on that later. But I wanted to read and study the original version. The reason is because there is clearly an evolving theology that is post-1830. So not only does the book evolve and change not only by the latter religious community, which is the LDS, or the Mormons as they're known colloquially, but even Joseph Smith himself, he went back into the book and made changes to the text. So I'll give you a basic narrative of the story. So the idea is that Joseph Smith had a vision in the woods, and this vision is controversial because there are different versions of this vision by Joseph Smith himself. He gave different stories on this matter. Either an angel appeared to him or two personages appeared to him. So there is some controversy even on this. But the point is, a miraculous event of some sort is being claimed, and he asked, which church should I follow? And the vision told them, again, different things. And in some versions, he was told none of them should be followed. The point is, he was eventually directed to a section of the woods in which he was going to find a box, and within the box you had the Book of Mormon. You had some stones called the Urim and Thummim, which is a reference to the Old Testament, as some of you may know, and the sword, etc. There were a couple items in the box, and you had the Book of Mormon and golden plates That's also a controversy because some people say they're golden plates, not necessarily gold plates, because of the dynamics of the plates. If they're gold, it would be too heavy to carry around, etc. But the point is, there were golden plates, and in these golden plates, the Book of Mormon is supposed to be contained therein. Now he goes on the mission of translating them. Now, of course, the language is supposed to be Reform Egyptian, and again, there's some controversy in how he translated that, because there's some stories in which he had the book and he just translated, and other people say that he put the magic stones in a hat, he looked into the hat, and he could see the words come up, and he would translate like that. Either way, the point is that the result of the operation is this Book of Mormon, and he published it in 1830, and it caused quite a stir because of the story. Within the Book of Mormon, you have the story of this ancient people from Jerusalem who escape before the fall of the first temple and the Babylonian exile, and they decide to abandon Jerusalem, and they end up in a boat crossing the Atlantic and landing in the Americas, from which an entire story evolves, and you have these two brothers who eventually fight, Laman and Nephi, who eventually fight with each other and separate to the point at which you literally have two different races of people fighting in the continent over land and over dominance. The Lamanites being the forefathers of the Native Americans, and the Nephites being an extinct group eventually. And my intent is not to spoil the story. I'm just giving you the basics. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a very well-known book. I'm just giving you the basic idea here so I can present it. So they're fighting, and then Jesus, when he resurrects in the New Testament and he lifts himself up to heaven, the story goes that he descends in America to the Lamanites and the Nephites and presents his gospel, chooses 12 new disciples, then he leaves all the way to the end of the story. So it is basically a biblical story in the Americas, including that Jesus himself visited the Americas and considered the Americas to be a land of promise. So that's key in the story, because that's what makes it very American. Not only that, but even some theological concepts and some political concepts in the book are pretty American, and I'll go into that in a second. Now, the changes to the book are interesting because there is an evolving theology. When you read the original book, it is pretty clear that the dynamics of who God is and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit are pretty close to the traditional Christian viewpoint, although it is a lot more modalistic, which is in traditional Christianity a heresy, meaning Jesus is the Father and the Father is the Son, and they seem to be only modal differences between the three persons, so that constantly you have these verses in which you have Mary giving birth to the very Father, so that Jesus is the Father, which is not a very Trinitarian way of communicating. Now, some of these changes that came after that Joseph Smith himself added to the text have to do with this, in which he would have Jesus God, but then he would add Son of God, and he would make this alteration in a lot of points in the text, in which he would add Son of. Now, he didn't do it in every point of the text. Some people argue it's because he forgot, or he just didn't have the time to finish it, or he simply didn't remember where they were, or it was purposeful. In other words, that he was only changing Son of God because he felt he needed to clarify that. But at the end of the day, that's always going to be controversial. Why did he change it, etc.? But it does modify the modalism in the text when he makes that change. So you can see already a change in theology. And post that modification in the text, there's a continuous evolving theology. Eventually it becomes something different in the sense that now God is a man of flesh and bone who became a God, and then he has a son, and the purpose of creation is for deification, for human beings to emulate their Father in heaven, who is this man who became a god, and the purpose is becoming a god ourselves. And that's the connection with occultism, which I find interesting. I've made videos on occultism before, but from the occultic perspective, the Book of Mormon is not an occultic book. It's a very traditional Christian book with its own differences from orthodoxy, but it's still a Christian book. But the theology that came after, that Joseph Smith himself developed and eventually continued under Brigham Young, it is quite an occultic philosophy. It has a lot of kinship with Martinism and Masonry and Rosicrucianism. So therefore, there's a lot of components there that it's clearly occultic. Even the whole temple conception and the LDS is very occultic. And again, just to clarify, so I don't offend any LDS people, when I say occult, I don't mean Hollywood Satanists or anything like this. I'm talking about traditional occultism, which was Christian from its very beginning. But it had a Hermetic component, an Egyptian component that it's clearly involved here, especially when Joseph Smith decided to translate like the Book of Abraham, etc., which has an Egyptian connection. But that would be for a different story there. So the deification, which in occultism is called Luciferianism, it's a form of Luciferianism, it's clearly present. And to me, that's very, very interesting there. So now the book does contain certain anachronisms. To me, the most impacting, and this is going to sound negative, but I actually appreciate and really enjoy the book. So I hope people understand that. A lot of people point out anachronisms like, certain animals that shouldn't be there, certain metals that shouldn't be there. I don't care too much about those anachronisms. It's very difficult to really know what's there and what's not there. Of course, archaeologists and anthropologists can have their legitimate scientific opinions. I'm not any of those. What I do care is the anachronisms on textual differences. What I mean by that is that the Book of Mormon is constantly citing Isaiah. Now remember, the book is a collection of books that are meant to be ancient, pre-Christian, and then some of them really at the end will be post-Christian. But most of the Book of Mormon is pre-Christian. And all the citations from Isaiah and any other citation that is verbatim placed on the Book of Mormon is literally the King James Version that Joseph Smith had available to him. So any scribal errors, any translation errors that were in the KJV are literally in the Book of Mormon itself. That is an obvious anachronism, because it would mean that the Book of Mormon in the ancient world was making the same mistakes, which are technically translation errors, they were making them in the ancient world. Now, I've heard a theologian from the LDS say that the reason this is happening is because when Joseph Smith was translating and he saw that Isaiah was being cited, he basically cited the Isaiah that he knew. That's the best way of trying to bypass this issue. So I respect that attempt. I still find it problematic. And to me, the nail really to the issue that I'm pointing out is the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. Because Joseph Smith attempted to translate the Bible and have his own version. And he would call it the inspired version. People call it the JST. Now, the anachronism comes to light there because in the Book of Mormon, he is citing Isaiah. There's also citations of the letters from Paul, which is, to me, a huge anachronism, because how can someone in the Americas cite verbatim a letter from Paul to the Romans or to the Corinthians, for example? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. And not only that, but when Jesus comes down into the Americas and he speaks, he is speaking the exact same words that you find in the Gospels, verbatim. Even in certain sections in which he's speaking to his new 12 disciples, it's citing the New Testament when Jesus is speaking to the disciples in Jerusalem, and all they're doing is replacing the location, but the words are identical. So that means Jesus, it's like a robot. He went up from Jerusalem, went down to the Americas, but then he's saying the same exact words to these new 12 disciples. That to me is difficult to swallow, but again, I'm just putting out my opinion here. But anyway, going to the JST, when the JST is fixed, in other words, when Joseph Smith says, no, this Bible is wrong, I'm going to give the correct translation, the correct meaning of this verse, he contradicts the same verse being cited in the Book of Mormon. So that you have this weird situation in which you have the King James Version being cited in the Book of Mormon. Then you have the inspired version of the Bible in which Joseph Smith fixes what he thinks is incorrect by divine inspiration. But then it doesn't fix the Book of Mormon, which means that now you have a Book of Mormon that is supposed to be older, citing the King James Version, and then you have the inspired version going against the citation of the Book of Mormon, meaning that the Book of Mormon now has wrong citations. And remember, the Book of Mormon is supposed to address the issue that the Bible is corrupted in some sense, and the Book of Mormon is meant to correct, to rectify the issue, so that you read the Book of Mormon and what you see there is a correct thing because it's pure and uncontaminated, and therefore in comparison to the Bible you would be able to understand the Bible through the Book of Mormon. But if the Book of Mormon is citing corrupted passages in the Bible, then you have a huge problem. And I think this is the reason why the LDS officially does not consider the JST to be the official Bible. They still use the KJV. Makes sense, because if you didn't do that, it would be quite a mess. So those were my 2 cents on the negatives there. Again, it's my opinion. I could be wrong. I'm just giving you my perception and what I find with the text to be interesting or difficult to manage. A couple of last points. In the Book of Alma, there's an event in which the people of Nephi are very particular about not punishing belief, but only punishing bad behavior. That to me is interesting because it is somewhat contrary to the traditional Christian notion that belief, meaning your theology, your correct or incorrect theology, defines your relationship with God. It is not enough to do good, but it is required that you understand and believe correctly. So true belief, orthodoxy, is crucial in traditional Christianity. But here, he is making the argument that true belief is irrelevant. They shouldn't be punished because everyone is free to think as they wish, which is a clearly Enlightenment influence point of view. And that would be also anachronistic in some way. And finally, you have the conception, which is common to all Christians, which is the idea that God does not change. But of course, if God doesn't change, his books shouldn't change. So that puts a small wrench in the machine there. So anyhow, I think the Book of Mormon is a very important book to study. It is entertaining if you want to see it from an entertainment point of view, from a literary point of view. It is a very well-written book. Nobody can say that Joseph Smith in any way was not a smart man, even if you think this was by Joseph Smith. If you're cynical about it and you want to think that this is just a work of literature that he put together somehow, it's still a very good book as a work of literature, just because it's creative and fascinating. Now, there's some aspects of the book that can be somewhat circular. I mean, how many times can the people of Nephi fall away and conquer the Lamanites, and the Lamanites fall away and then conquer the Nephites and go over and over and over again? That is repetitive. But if you read it with an open mind and you read it with a perspective of looking at theology and what the book is trying to teach, the basic teaching is very good. Your relationship with God is important. Your relationship with the divine is important. And your behavior in life is important. It's not enough to just believe, but it's also crucial to behave in concordance with belief. Actually, that's the real meaning of faith. It's fidelity, it's loyalty, And loyalty means following through with the actions, not only with the belief. It's not enough to say, I believe that X is right. It is necessary for you to behave in concordance with that belief. That's a traditional Christian point of view. And surrounding Joseph Smith at the time were mostly people that did not believe that works mattered. So the fact that the Book of Mormon does focus again on works is bringing back Christianity to its origin. So in that sense, it's very traditional. And as a community, the LDS people are very, very nice people and very respectful people. At least that's been my experience. And I do appreciate this book a lot, and this is why I am recommending it here. So thank you for joining me. I hope that this video was in any way encouraging for you to engage in this work. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, like the video if you like the content, share the video, comment on the video, and click the bell for notifications. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.